Welcome to Generous Theology. Chuck and Brock take a break from reading material today and talk about their own personal experiences in Christian life.
Chuck, that's beautiful, and thank you for sharing that. I think one of the things that rings through so beautifully in the way you've structured and went through things. I babysit a young little girl. One of the joys for me when I talk to this little girl about myself and my wife is that I mention to this little girl who's 7 years old, I say, she and I, meaning my wife and I, we're one. And she looks at me and says, no, you're not the same as your wife. You're two different persons. I look at her and I say, nope, we are one. And that is what came through to me when you were talking about your situation, is how your family and you are really, there's a discontinuity there. You are not your parents are not you, and at the same point in time, you are your parents and your relatives and the family of faith. And that unified view of looking at people allows Christians to realize that there is a bond present in the Christian family, and we are one in a sense, and in a very important and fundamental sense. And I love how that came through when you were discussing the situation. And that to me actually is one of the interesting aspects of Herman Bavinck's theology and the Dutch Reformed theology. And that is the idea, this organic nature of living thing, maybe in contrast to the programmed nature of mechanical things, the designed, the rule-based systems of rational thought, let's say. There's something more involved there. And that unity, you see yourself as a continuation of who came before you, and you will see yourself in the continuation of who comes after. And I feel the same. There's a song that I grew up on in the Christian church. We are one in the Spirit. We are one in the Lord. We are one in the bond of love is another hymn. And I think that bears repeating in this very individualistic age, because when I'm too busy being me to take notice of you, something important is lost. And I've heard that sort of thing my whole life, Chuck, and my eyes rolled around. Yeah, community, blah, blah, blah. But now I'm of an age where all of a sudden that has become vitally important, especially in the reading of the scriptures. When I read about how God desires us to take care of each other, for us to be there for our neighbors, for our family, for society. Now, it's not a call to victimhood. It's not a call to being a doormat. It's not a call to commingled funds or communistic utopian living, but it is a call to recognize that connectedness. And that is one of the things that was so attractive to me that Bavinck had, that I thought put him above many other Reformed theologians, who I did not disparage. I love many other theologians in the Reformed tradition, but I've just had this sense that Bavinck had this, what people call an organic quality to his understanding that I thought was so beautiful and really improved on some of the other typical treatments in Reformed theology. So I was very attracted to his theology. And you mentioned something that I think it's easy to miss or overlook, and that is the availability in English of Bavinck's works. And now also, for example, additional works from Gerhardus Voss, another Dutch Reformed theologian. You can go and talk about, it's not just Bavinck here. There is this tradition that is very wholesome and very worthwhile. And now there are these works that are available in English. I feel like a millionaire, Chuck, having Bavinck's Reformed Dogmatics, his Reformed Ethics, having Voss's Reformed Dogmatics in its catechism form. I feel like a millionaire. And when it talks about God being wealthy, when the scriptures speak of God being a storehouse of infinite wealth, he owns the cattle on 1,000 hills, is the hallmark expression. When I was a young man, I read that and I was like, what will that mean for me? How is it that God will make me wealthy? And I have to say, I feel more than a millionaire. I feel like a billionaire, having the theology of those two men and other godly men, especially in the Dutch Reformed tradition, not limited to it, but for example, like Anthony Hoekema, G.C. Berkouwer, there are others not explicitly Dutch Reformed, but I'm a billionaire in this sense, Chuck, and it astonishes me now that I have these riches. And here's another beautiful thing, Chuck. The more I give these riches away, the richer I become. And Wow. What do you think about how would you assess and evaluate that, the impact of having these writings in English now for our generation?
Yeah, it is amazing. And you're right. There's like this upside down economy. Not only do we gain so much by having these things, but as we give it away, as we teach it to others, as we teach our kids. I've got three kids of my own. It just continues to multiply. Yeah, it is amazing. And we are very fortunate that so much of this material is becoming more and more available in the English language. And for so long, because the Netherlands is such a small country, a lot of this stuff, it had an impact, but that impact was sometimes somewhat limited to people who understood, who could read the Dutch, to some of these immigrant groups. And we did have some impact from it. But now that we've got folks who are doing all this work translating, and there is a Herman Bavinck Translation Society, it's just amazing how much more is available than even 20, 25 years ago. And it's just such good stuff. And I love the title that you've given to this, The Generous Theology of Herman Bavinck, because that generous, it's a description of the theology, it's a description of the way that Bavinck wrote his theology in a very generous way. But it's also very much, as we read it and as we digest it, it's just so much that it gives back to us, that tradition and that theology is so generous and is now being spread. It's amazing to me how much, whether it's Bavinck, whether it's people like Kuyper, how much impact that is having outside of just the Dutch Reformed tradition. And again, I think that's also a sense of its generousness. And in fact, I think there are times when, the impact that it's that kind of theology is having and that kind of worldview is having, there are many people who are impacted by it who don't even necessarily know where it's coming from. And that's not all that important now. It'd be great to dive into it further. But again, that is a reflection of its generous, that even those who have no clue who Herman Bavinck is, who Abraham Kuyper is, are being impacted in positive ways by the work that these men did in this little country 100 years ago or more. And that was brought over to the U.S. by this little tiny group of immigrants, who many of whom were farmers and factory workers who were reading it on their own. And now it's got this impact far beyond them. And it just shows how God works through his people in ways that we can't even imagine.